My girlfriend sneered. He's as useless as the plans he makes. I just looked at her and said, okay. She didn't know those useless plans were booby-trapped with proof. The schemes she stole from me would quietly cost her everything forever done. The boardroom was silent. All eyes were on me. Allison, my fiancée, stared across the polished table, her eyes like ice. Her voice cut through the quiet. Sir, do you really think investors will trust millions of dollars to a project where the final decisions are made by a carpenter? 30 pairs of eyes watched me. I looked down at my hands, calloused, still traces of oak dust under the nails. Then I looked up, met her gaze, and I smiled. She's absolutely right, I said calmly. I'm just a carpenter. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and I walked out of the room. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, leaving them all in that stunned silence. My name is Luke. I'm 32 years old. I build things with my hands. It sounds simple when you say it like that, but it's more than just a job. It's who I am. I'm a master craftsman specializing in high-end architectural woodwork. I restore old pieces, bring forgotten beauty back to life, and create new things from raw timber. Things with substance, things meant to last generations. My fiancée Allison, she's 29. She's the director of project development at the luxury real estate firm owned by her father, Robert. We met 3 years ago when Robert, impressed by a restoration project I'd done for a mutual acquaintance, brought me in to establish and lead the company's custom millwork division. He wanted authenticity, that handcrafted touch to elevate his developments above the competition. On the surface, we were the perfect story. Everyone called us the power couple. Allison, the brilliant, sharp strategist with the Ivy League degree and the flawless presentation skills landing multi-million-dollar deals. And me, the quiet, focused guy in the background, the head artisan ensuring the million-dollar promises she made were actually built with tangible quality, with wood that sang under your touch. She brought the sizzle. I brought the steak. Or so I thought. We got engaged a year in. It felt like the natural progression. Everyone said it made sense. The brains and the hands, the ambitious executive and the skilled craftsman, the heiress apparent, and the man who built things worthy of her future empire. A perfect complementary match. Looking back now after the explosion, the fault lines were always there, hidden beneath the polished veneer we presented to the world. Allison believed fiercely in personal branding, in perception, in the narrative. She curated her life, her image, with meticulous care. Everything was about projecting success, status, effortless elegance. I believed in solid wood, tight joinery, the inherent honesty of materials. I believed that value wasn't something you declared, but something you built painstakingly over time. She'd sometimes wrinkle her nose subtly when I came home from the workshop even after I'd showered. Can you maybe change again before we meet the Vanderbilts for drinks? She'd ask, her tone light, but the implication clear. You still smell faintly of sawdust. It's a bit earthy for the club. It wasn't a direct insult, just a constant low-level reminder that my world, the one that paid for the apartment we lived in, wasn't quite up to her aesthetic standards. Then there were the jokes, the little digs disguised as playful banter, usually deployed in front of her high society friends or potential clients. At company dinners, when someone would ask about my work, she'd often jump in before I could answer. "Oh, Luke, he does the most adorable things with wood," she'd say, patting my hand. "It's so lovely he gets paid for his little craft hobby while I have to do the real work wrestling spreadsheets and charming investors." She'd laugh that bright, infectious laugh that always drew people in, and her friends would titter politely. And I'd just smile clenched inside, telling myself she didn't mean it maliciously. Telling myself she was just trying to be self-deprecating about her own demanding job. Telling myself I was being too sensitive. After all, she loved me right. She chose me. I was the steady, reliable anchor to her glittering ambition. The stress had been mounting for months, centered around the company's make-or-break project, Sky Vista. It wasn't just another luxury condo tower. It was Robert's legacy project, the crown jewel meant to solidify the firm's position at the absolute pinnacle of the market. $50 million in projected revenue with international investors already circling. Allison was heading the final critical round of funding presentations. Everything depended on closing this deal. Her future leadership of the company, Robert's retirement plans, the jobs of everyone in my workshop. The pressure on her was immense, palpable. And maybe that pressure was squeezing out the person I thought she was, revealing someone harder, colder underneath. The night before the big meeting, the final pitch to the key international investors, the night everything detonated. She laid out my suit for me on the bed. A navy Brioni one she'd insisted I buy. Not unusual, she always liked coordinating our appearance, presenting a united, polished front. But then she straightened. My tie looked me directly in the eye, her expression serious. "Luke," she said, her voice dropping slightly. "Tomorrow is huge, just sit there beside me, look supportive. Nod when I nod. But please," she paused, searching for the right words, or maybe the least offensive ones. "Please don't try to explain the specifics. The wood grain, the joinery techniques, the sourcing. It's too granular. It bogs things down. Just let me handle the thinking part, okay? The big picture." She kissed my cheek, a quick, almost dismissive peck. Said it like she was guiding me, protecting me from embarrassing myself, doing me a favor. Said it like my 4 years of university training in fine woodworking and decade of hands-on experience, the very expertise Robert had hired me for, was now an inconvenient detail, a liability she needed to carefully manage in front of the people holding the purse strings. A knot tightened in my stomach, but I just nodded. "Okay, Allison, whatever you need." What she needed, apparently, was for me to be invisible. My phone started vibrating almost the second the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, the muffled sounds of the boardroom instantly silenced. I didn't look at it as I walked down the plushly carpeted corridor past abstract art pieces that probably cost more than my truck towards the elevator. The ride down from the 40th floor felt like descending into a different reality. The air in the elevator was cool, sterile, smelling faintly of expensive cleaning products. I caught my reflection in the mirrored walls. Navy suit, crisp white shirt, the tie Allison had chosen. I looked the part, didn't I, the successful partner to the rising star executive? But the reflection felt hollow, disconnected. When I reached my beat-up Ford F-150 in the parking garage, a stark contrast to the gleaming Teslas and BMWs parked nearby, I slid into the driver's seat. The familiar scent of wood shavings, turpentine, and worn leather enveloped me, a grounding antidote to the artificial atmosphere upstairs. That's when I finally pulled out my phone, a supernova of notifications. Allison. Text after text, a rapid-fire barrage fueled by disbelief and fury. "Where did you just go? Luke, get back here right now. You just walked out on the biggest meeting of my career. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Are you insane? Answer your phone. This is unbelievably childish. We need to talk. Now." Her words pulsed on the screen, each exclamation point a tiny stab. I could picture her face flushed with anger, maybe a hint of panic underneath. The investors? What must they be thinking? Had I just torpedoed the deal? Part of me, the part conditioned by 3 years of prioritizing her ambition, felt a pang of guilt. But it was quickly drowned out by a colder, harder feeling crystallizing in my chest. I didn't reply. I just sat there, the engine off, the concrete pillars of the garage casting long shadows in the dim light. I stared out at the sprawling cityscape visible through the grimy windshield. Helicopters buzzed silently in the distance. The city looked indifferent, vast, unaware of the small implosion that had just occurred on the 40th floor. Her voice echoed in my head, not the texts, but the words spoken in that silent room. Decisions made. By a carpenter. The emphasis, the slight curl of her lip, the shared glance with her father Robert, who just sat there impassive. My boss. My future father-in-law. He'd heard his daughter reduce my life's work, my identity, to a punchline, a disqualifier in the world of high finance and strategic decisions, and he hadn't blinked. In his silence, he co-signed her contempt. I looked down at my hands again, resting them on the worn steering wheel. Calloused. Rough in places. Traces of oak dust still stubbornly clinging under the nails despite scrubbing them raw before the meeting. These hands knew the language of wood in a way Allison, with her perfectly manicured nails and MBA jargon, could never comprehend. These hands could feel the tension in a grain, predict how a joint would hold under pressure, coax beauty from a raw slab. These hands built the intricate, swirling reception desk in the lobby of this very building, a piece Allison bragged about to clients, conveniently omitting who designed and built it. These hands restored the antique 17th century boardroom table they were probably still sitting around right now, arguing about my inexplicable departure. These hands built the goddamn rocking cradle her sister Jessica cried over when I gave it to her for her first baby shower just 6 months ago. A gift Allison initially called a bit rustic, until Jessica adored it. These weren't just a carpenter's hands. They were the hands of an artist, a problem solver, a creator. They were my hands. And she had used the physical manifestation of my skill, my passion, my very being as a weapon against me. She used it to diminish me, to categorize me as lesser than, in that room full of suits who dealt in abstractions and projections, not tangible realities. She did it to make herself seem smarter, more essential, the only one truly qualified to handle the thinking part. She thought I walked out because I was wounded. Because her words had pierced my pride, confirmed some deep-seated insecurity she probably assumed I harbored about not having a fancy degree or a corner office. She thought I was fleeing the scene out of shame-weakness. She thought she'd won that power play, effortlessly swatting away the inconvenient, unrefined element, me, that might derail her meticulously crafted presentation. She probably assumed I'd come crawling back later tonight, full of apologies for my overreaction, ready to smooth things over so her ambition wouldn't be inconvenienced. She didn't understand, not even close. My walking out wasn't surrender. It wasn't a petulant tantrum. It was the final decisive move in a game she hadn't even realized we were playing. A game about respect, about value, about the fundamental contract of our relationship that she had just publicly shredded. It was the quiet click of a lock falling into place. You see, we're conditioned, aren't we? Taught from a young age that strength means shouting louder, arguing harder, fighting tooth and nail to win the battle of words, to prove the other person wrong. We see it in movies and politics, sometimes even in our own families. But there's a different kind of power, a strength that often goes unrecognized, because it doesn't announce itself with noise and fury. It's the profound power of choosing not to engage. This quiet exit, it isn't the retreat of the defeated. No, it's the calculated strategic withdrawal of someone who has finally, irrevocably recognized that the game itself, the entire playing field, is rigged, toxic, and simply not worth their energy, their peace, their self-respect anymore. When I stood there, met her condescending gaze, and calmly said, "She's absolutely right." Before walking out of that room, I wasn't validating her insult. I wasn't crumbling under the weight of her judgment. I was doing something far more radical. I was taking away her biggest weapon, the argument she clearly craved, the emotional reaction she undoubtedly expected, maybe even hoped for, to further paint me as unstable, the dramatic scene she might have used later to justify her actions. By refusing to participate in her carefully staged narrative, by calmly accepting her distorted label and physically removing myself from her stage, I rendered her attack impotent. I neutralized the venom. I shifted the focus entirely away from her sharp words and onto my quiet, deliberate action, the simple, undeniable, irreversible act of leaving. It's a strange, powerful paradox, isn't it? In so many of life's messy conflicts, the only real way to achieve victory, to preserve what truly matters, is to refuse to fight on the enemy's terms. You don't engage with the chaos. You don't wrestle with the mud. You simply calmly walk away from the chessboard, taking your king, your non-negotiable self-respect, your intrinsic dignity, safely with you. You leave the opponent alone on the board, perhaps momentarily triumphant in their perceived win, but ultimately checkmated by their own aggression, surrounded only by the echoing emptiness they themselves created. And me, sitting there in the quiet sanctuary of my truck, the smell of honest work clinging to the upholstery, I had just decisively taken my king off the board. Allison could have her hollow victory speech in that glass tower. She could spin whatever narrative she needed to salvage the meeting, to explain my sudden departure. It didn't matter anymore, because I wasn't playing her game any longer. I was already starting to draw the blueprints for a completely different map, one where the lines were drawn with integrity and the foundation was built on respect. My respect for myself. My initial plan was simple, dignified even. I wasn't going to engage in a messy public breakup. No screaming matches, no passive-aggressive social media posts. I'd pack my essential tools, my clothes, the few personal items that mattered. I'd draft a polite professional resignation letter for Robert citing personal reasons. I'd find a small workshop somewhere, maybe upstate, start over. Quietly. This chapter, this 3-year engagement built on a foundation I now saw was riddled with dry rot, was over. The marriage hadn't just died in that boardroom. It had been a phantom limb all along. All that remained was the clean amputation. I spent the rest of that Friday finalizing the logistics in my head. Cancel joint accounts. Forward mail. Figure out how to divide the few things we actually owned together, though honestly, most of the furniture, the art, even the damn espresso machine was mine from before she moved in. She just inhabited my space, slowly rebranding it as ours. The thought brought a bitter taste to my mouth. Saturday passed in a blur of numb activity. Packing boxes, sorting tools. Allison kept calling, texting, alternating between fury and fake concern. Are you okay? Where are you? Robert is furious with you. You owe me an explanation. I ignored it all. The silence felt like armor. Sunday night, 1 a.m. I was sitting at my workbench in the garage, surrounded by half-packed crates, drafting that resignation email. My fingers felt heavy on the keyboard. Dear Robert. I typed, "It is with regret." Regret. Yeah, there was regret. Regret for the wasted time, the ignored red flags, the future I'd meticulously planned, that now felt like a fictional story. Just as I was about to send a new email popped into my inbox. Not from Allison. Not from Robert. The sender, Casey. The unassuming, perpetually stressed-out chief accountant, Casey. The subject line jumped out stark against the late-night quiet. Don't let her win. She's a fraud. My blood ran cold. I clicked it open. The email was short, frantic, typed quickly. Luke, I saw you leave the meeting. I know what she said. It was disgusting. But you need to know it's bigger than that. She didn't just insult you. She's actively defrauding the investors, all of them. Robert knows. He's letting her do it. My heart started pounding. What the hell was he talking about? She created 2 sets of material specs for Sky Vista. The email continued. One for the investor prospectus, North American White Oak A-grade quarter sawn the best money can buy. That's the $3.5 million version they think they're funding. But the actual purchase orders, the ones going to the suppliers. Pine. Cheap, fast-growth pine, stained and finished to look like oak from a distance. Total cost, maybe $500,000. She and Robert are planning to pocket the $3 million difference. $3 million. Stolen. Not through clever accounting, but through blatant material substitution. Trading solid oak for cheap pine. Trading integrity for cash. Casey's final lines hit me like a physical blow. I have the duplicate invoices, the altered purchase orders. I confronted Robert. He told me to mind my own business. Said I don't understand materials, and that the investors will never know the difference once the finish is applied. But you know the difference, Luke. You're the only one who can prove it physically. She thinks she has everyone fooled. Please don't let them get away with this. I sat back rereading the email. Twice. 3 times. The numb resignation I'd felt evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This wasn't just about a personal betrayal anymore, about a fiancé who despised my profession, about a relationship ending in public humiliation. This was bigger. This was fraud on a massive scale. This was about the integrity of the materials, the trust of the investors, the reputation of every honest craftsman who poured their skill into their work. This was about the fundamental difference between building something real and building a beautiful lie. Allison hadn't just insulted my hands. She was planning to use cheap imitations while selling the promise of the quality only my kind of work could provide. The irony was suffocating. My plan changed in that instant. Packing stopped. The resignation email remained unsent. Leaving quietly wasn't an option anymore. Retreat wasn't strength in this situation. Allison and Robert hadn't just drawn a line between us. They had crossed a line into illegality, into blatant theft disguised as business strategy. This wasn't about my broken heart anymore. It was about exposing the rot beneath the veneer. It was about truth. It was about justice. And ironically, the only person who could deliver it was the carpenter they so easily dismissed. The next morning, I did something that felt like swallowing glass. I called Allison. She picked up on the second ring, her voice wary, sharp. "What do you want, Luke?" I kept my voice even, injecting a note of tired resignation. "Look, Allie, I overreacted yesterday. You were under pressure. I shouldn't have just walked out. That was unprofessional." Silence on her end. Then a slow exhale, the sound of her letting go of the tension she'd clearly been holding. "Well," she said, her tone shifting, becoming magnanimous, almost pitying. "It was pretty dramatic, Luke. You really put me in a tough spot." I know. I'm sorry," I lied. "I just need some space to clear my head. I think I'll work out of my own workshop for a couple of weeks, finish up that side project I've been putting off. Give us both some breathing room before the wedding." "Oh." She sounded surprised, maybe even relieved. "Okay. Yes, maybe that's wise. Take all the time you need." Then the condescension crept back in. "Focus on your little project. Get it out of your system. I'll handle the important stuff here. Let me know when you're ready to be a team player again." She hung up before I could reply. Perfect. The second that call ended, the act dropped. There was no more space for hurt feelings. There was only the plan. "Stico." Then Ahmad called Casey. "I need both sets of Sky Vista millwork drawings, the ones for the investors and the real ones, immediately. No digital copies. Hard copies only delivered to my workshop address after hours." Then I drove straight to my bank. I stood before the teller, slid my withdrawal slip across the counter. $10,000. Cash. My emergency fund money I'd painstakingly saved over 5 years. The teller raised an eyebrow, but processed it without comment. Then I called my primary lumber supplier, old Mr. Henderson, a man whose family had been in the timber business for a century, a man who understood wood like he understood breathing. "Henderson," I said, "it's Luke. I need North American white oak, A-grade prime quarter sawn. Enough for, let's call it a very detailed architectural model, and I need it yesterday." He chuckled. "Sounds urgent, son. You building a case against someone, something like that," I replied. "Just make sure it's the best you've got. No compromises." For the next 2 weeks, my workshop became my entire world. 18-hour days, fueled by black coffee and cold fury channeled into focused precision. Allison texted occasionally, "Hope you're figuring things out. Dinner with the Sinclairs next week, try to be presentable." Oblivious. She was probably enjoying the space-planning wedding details, celebrating her successful pitch. Confident her little secret was safe. Confident her tame carpenter was licking his wounds somewhere quiet. She had no idea the carpenter was at war. This wasn't about anger anymore. This was about craft. This was about truth rendered in tangible form. Casey's drawings arrived. 2 identical sets of blueprints differing only in the microscopic codes specifying the materials. Using those plans, I began constructing not 1 but 2 identical intricate scale models, 1/10 scale, of a signature corner section of the Sky Vista luxury apartments. Every detail perfect, the window casings, the crown molding the built-in shelving units Allison had bragged about in the prospectus. One model I built using the cheap, fast-growth pine specified in Allison's real purchase orders. I stained it, finished it exactly as the production crew likely would, disguising its cheapness under layers of sealant and color. It looked fine, serviceable. The kind of thing most people wouldn't question in a finished apartment, especially not after paying $3 million for the view. The other model. That was my testament. That was the truth. Built with the $10,000 of A-grade quarter-sawn white oak Mr. Henderson had delivered under the cover of night. The grain glowed under my hands. The weight of it felt substantial, honest. I used traditional joinery dovetails hidden inside miter's techniques Allison wouldn't know existed, let alone appreciate. I sanded it smooth as silk, finished it with natural oils that brought out its depth, its character. Side by side, the difference was subtle to the untrained eye, perhaps. But to anyone who understood quality, to anyone who valued authenticity, the difference was screamingly obvious. One was a facade. The other was real. Allison had mocked my craft, dismissed my skill as irrelevant in her world of high-stakes deals and strategic positioning. Fine. I would use that very craft, that very skill she despised as the ultimate weapon. Not a weapon of anger, but a weapon of clarity, a physical manifestation of her lie built by the very hands she scorned. The irony was exquisite, poetic justice carved in wood. My little project was almost complete, and the final presentation was going to be unforgettable. 2 weeks later. The final signing meeting for the Sky Vista project. Back in the same gleaming boardroom, 40th floor. This time the atmosphere wasn't tense. It was celebratory. Allison was radiant, dressed in a sharp power suit, effortlessly charming the lead investor Mr. Davies, the same man who'd asked me about the oak quality 2 weeks prior. Robert stood beside her, beaming, accepting congratulations before the contracts were even signed. Champagne flutes sat waiting on a side table. The thick contract documents lay open on the polished table pens, strategically placed beside them. Victory was palpable in the air. Allison caught my eye across the room. I'd been summoned ostensibly to be part of the team celebration, and gave me a small, tight smile, the kind that said, "See, I handled it. Now play your part." Mr. Davies picked up his pen. "Well, Allison, Robert, it's been a long road, but your vision is impressive. We're ready to make Sky Vista a reality." Right at that moment, the double doors at the far end of the boardroom swung open. I hadn't entered with everyone else. I'd waited outside. Now I pushed 2 tall wheeled carts into the room. Each cart held a large object draped entirely in black velvet. Every head turned. The celebratory chatter died instantly. Allison's smile froze, then vanished. Her face went pale, a flicker of panic in her eyes. "Luke," she stammered, her voice suddenly unsure. "What? What is this? What are you doing here now?" Robert frowned, looking annoyed at the interruption. I ignored them both, addressing the investors directly, my voice calm but carrying in the sudden silence. "Gentlemen," I said, nodding towards Mr. Davies, "Allison gave you a truly excellent presentation on the numbers, the projections, the return on investment." I paused, letting the implication hang. But she seems to have overlooked the most crucial part of any construction project. The materials demo. Materials demo, Mr. Davies repeated, lowering his pen, intrigued. "We saw the spec sheets." "Spec sheets can say anything," I replied smoothly. But feeling the difference, seeing the reality that requires something more tangible, Allison took a step forward, trying to regain control. "Luke, this really isn't necessary. We have detailed documentation." "Oh, I think it is necessary." Mr. Davies' cut in his eyes narrowed, fixed on the veiled objects. "We're investing $50 million. We have time for a demonstration. Please proceed, Luke." I nodded my thanks. SFX sound of fabric pulling away smoothly. Swoosh. I reached out and pulled the black velvet cover off the first cart. Underneath sat the first model, the corner section of the Sky Vista apartment, built precisely to scale. The lighting in the room glinted off the smooth, stained finish. It looked acceptable. "This," I announced, gesturing to the model, "represents Sky Vista as specified in the internal construction documents. The materials Ms. Allison has actually ordered and intends to use." Just then, as planned, the side door opened and Casey, the accountant, walked in silently. He carried a small stack of folders. Without a word, He placed one folder in front of each investor. Inside were the real purchase orders, the invoices for the cheap pine clearly marked. I let the investors glance through the papers for a moment, letting the discrepancy sink in. Allison shot daggers at Casey, who avoided her gaze, staring straight ahead. Robert looked like he was about to explode. As you can see, I continued, this model is constructed primarily from fast-growth pine-sourced, economically finished, to mimic a higher-grade wood. It meets basic structural requirements, certainly. The total estimated materials cost for the millwork using this approach across the entire project, roughly $500,000. I let that number hang in the air. Then I moved to the second cart. I pulled away the second velvet cover. The difference was immediate, visceral. The second model seemed to glow under the boardroom lights. The tight grain of the quarter-sawn white oak, the subtle luster of the natural oil finished the precision of the joinery. It radiated quality, substance, value. And this, I said, my voice gaining a quiet intensity, is the sky vista that was presented to you, the one described in the investor prospectus. North American white oak A-grade prime. I ran my hand over the smooth, cool surface. The materials cost for this version is approximately $3.5 million. The investors stared, flipping between the damning invoices Casey had provided and the stark visual contrast before them. Mr. Davies looked from the cheap pine model to the solid oak model, then to Allison, his expression hardening. As a craftsman, I said, pulling a heavy old silver dollar from my pocket, my grandfather's lucky coin, I believe in tactile truth. In what you can feel, what you can hear. I walked to the pine model. I held the coin above it and dropped it. The sound died, quickly absorbed by the soft wood. Then I walked to the oak model. I held the coin in the exact same way, at the same height, and let it fall. SFX, a clear, resonant ting or keng. The sound rang out, pure and sustained, echoing slightly in the stunned silence of the room. I picked up the coin, turned, and looked directly at Allison. Her face was ashen. Robert looked apoplectic. Gentlemen, I said, my gaze sweeping across the investors, then finally locking back onto Allison's. Even if you're not a carpenter, I let the word hang dripping with the irony she had intended just 2 weeks ago. You can hear the sound of deception. The room erupted, not into applause, but into chaos. Allison finally broke the icy composure, shattering. This is insane, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. He's doing this out of spite. It's personal revenge because I ended things. Her voice cracked, tears of rage, not remorse, streaming down her face. Robert jumped to his feet, his face purple. This is a setup. Casey, he roared, turning on the accountant who stood stoically by the door. This is your doing, isn't it? A disgruntled employee, some kind of accounting error. He tried to grab the folders from the investors, sputtering about doctored invoices and professional jealousy, but it was too late. The physical evidence, the two models sitting there like silent judges, was irrefutable. The sound of that silver dollar hitting solid oak versus cheap pine echoed louder than any denial. Mr. Davies, the lead investor, the man whose question Allison had brushed aside just 2 weeks ago, slowly rose from his chair. He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. Robert, he said, ignoring Allison completely, his gaze fixed on the CEO. I don't give a damn about Mr. Luke's personal life or yours or your daughter's. He gestured dismissively towards Allison's outburst. What I care about is the $3 million difference between this. He pointed sharply at the glowing oak model, and that. His finger jabbed towards the cheap pine imitation. We invested in this. We were promised this. What you planned to deliver was fraud. He picked up the thick contract document that lay waiting to be signed. He didn't tear it dramatically. He simply held it up, looked Robert dead in the eye, and let it drop onto the table with a soft thud. The deal is off. Effective immediately. The consequences cascaded swiftly, brutally. The $50 million Sky Vista contract wasn't just canceled. It evaporated, taking with it Robert's legacy and Allison's ambition. Mr. Davies and his consortium didn't just walk away. They announced their intention to file a massive lawsuit against Robert Allison and the entire firm, citing corporate fraud, breach of contract, and deceptive practices. Robert didn't just face angry investors. He faced his own board of directors the very next morning. Presented with Casey's meticulously documented evidence and the investors' fury, they voted unanimously. He was fired, effective immediately. His decades-long reign ended not with a golden parachute, but with a security escort out of the building. And Allison didn't just lose her fiancé and her job title. The district attorney's office, alerted by the investors' lawyers, opened a criminal investigation into potential embezzlement and fraud. Her perfectly curated image, her brand, her entire future, built on projection and manipulation, it all dissolved under the harsh light of reality. Her empire, constructed of paper promises and strategic lies, crumbled spectacularly, all because she couldn't tell the difference, or rather refused to acknowledge the value, between real wood and a cheap imitation. All because she thought the carpenter didn't matter. I didn't watch the rest of the fallout. I simply walked over to Casey, nodded my thanks, and left the boardroom for the second and final time. That afternoon, I submitted my resignation. No lengthy explanation, just a simple formal notice. Robert was gone. Allison was facing legal battles. There was nothing left for me there. I went back to my workshop, my sanctuary. The scent of sawdust and linseed oil felt like coming home after a long, dirty war. I stood there for a long time, just running my hand over the smooth surface of an unfinished tabletop. I'd done the right thing, exposed the fraud, upheld the integrity of the craft. But the victory felt hollow. I'd lost my job, my fiancé, the future I thought I was building. It felt like I'd burned down the whole forest just to prove a point about one rotten tree. Was it worth it? Standing there alone, surrounded by the quiet potential of raw wood, I wasn't sure. 3 days later, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number, but the area code was international, one of the investor group's locations. Hesitantly, I answered. "Luke, it's Davies. Arthur Davies. The lead investor. The one whose questions started it all." My heart hammered. Was this about the lawsuit? Was I going to be dragged into depositions? "Mr. Davies," I said carefully. "Luke." He began, his voice surprisingly warm. "We canceled the Sky Vista contract, obviously. Robert and his daughter, well, that's a mess for the lawyers now." He paused. "But our group still intends to build in this city. We believe in the market. We just need the right partners." I waited, unsure where this was going. "We saw your work, Luke," Davies continued. "Not just the models, impressive as they were. We did our homework after that first meeting. We saw the quality you delivered on Robert's previous projects. We saw the passion in your eyes when you talked about wood, even when your fiancé was trying to shut you down." He chuckled dryly. "And frankly, we saw your integrity in that boardroom. It takes guts to do what you did." Thank you, sir," I managed. "So here's the proposal," Davies said, getting straight to the point. "We want to invest, not in Robert's tarnished company. We want to back someone who believes in building things properly from the ground up with honesty. We want to fund your new company, Luke. Give you the capital to establish your own firm, focusing on the high-end quality craftsmanship that impressed us in the first place. We'll be your first major client." I leaned against my workbench, the solid wood cool beneath my hand. Funding, my own company, built on my terms, my values. The hollowness I'd felt began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning ember of possibility. Allison had been right about one thing in that boardroom weeks ago. I wasn't a strategist, like her building castles in the air with spreadsheets and smooth talk. I wasn't someone who built empires on paper promises and calculated omissions. No, I am a builder. I build things that are real, things with weight, with texture, with integrity, things meant to last. And it turns out in the real world, beyond the smoke and mirrors of boardrooms and branding, that's what actually matters. That's the only thing that truly holds value. Last week, these hands, these calloused, sawdust-covered carpenter's hands she despised, signed a contract. A contract to build something beautiful, something honest. A contract bigger and built on a foundation far more solid than anything Allison, with all her strategies and connections, had ever dreamed of touching.